Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with Chuck Rogers. We're coming to you on January 13th, several hours ago. The president was impeached for a second time by votes of Congress. All the Democrats, pretty much, and 10 Republicans voting for impeachment, the entire Freedom Caucus, and most Republicans voting against it. I got to hear some of the debate. You got to hear some of the debates. Why don't we start with what happened, and then we'll talk about its significance, Chuck?
Well, the article of impeachment was incitement to insurrection, and which basically was captured on camera for the whole nation to see. So there was not much question about the facts that they were talking about, thank goodness. I heard some of it off and on today while I was getting the rest of my work done. One of the things that struck me was that most of what was said was predictable from one side to the other. But I thought it was interesting that the Republicans decided to allow Jim Jordan, who's a congressman from Ohio, Central Ohio, to be the one to lead things for the Republicans on the House floor. I don't know what to read into that.
Well, he's been the attack dog.
He's one of the staunchest.
They bring him in to say stuff that, that would be embarrassing for most other people.
Yeah, he's one of the staunchest pro-Trumpers in either house, that's for sure. I don't know whether it means that they were just letting him do this to speak his mind, knowing that the results were already known. Everybody knew what the final vote basically was going to be, or whether it means that his wing of the Republican Party in the House is going to be the one to take the mantle in the future. Is he the next Kevin McCarthy? Is he the next leader of the Republicans in the House? Was that the symbolism here? I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. He's got some scandals going back to when he was a wrestling coach at Ohio State, right, in which he's been accused of basically covering up for, sexual assault. And he's, again, was the one during the first impeachment hearing who would just interrupt the witnesses and not stop interrupting it, would be admonished by, whoever was in charge of the hearing at that particular moment. Then he was brought in to defend the case in the Senate. He basically is just, it seems like he's almost soulless in terms of the rhetoric, because he just says things he has to know are false. Right. Because I don't think he's a total idiot, but he is kind of the voice of that crazy wing, which right now is the majority of the Republican caucus. Mm-hmm. Now we've got Republicans are in a tough spot here. I mean, traditionally, I think that modern conservatism really got its start with McCarthyism. I've kind of said this before, and they were able to win elections into the 60s in the 50s and 60s by basically accusing the Democrats of being soft on communism. Mm-hmm. And then they got into trouble with Nixon, lost an election to probably one of the more liberal people that we've had, an outsider, and then won it again in 1980 by bringing together anti-abortionists, the quote-unquote moral majority, and making social issues today as basically as the South was switching over to having the white people be primarily Republicans, and the black people had already made the switch to Democrats back as far as the New Deal, and were really making the switch then. And that was how that was a coalition that helped them to win, and that worked up into the Bush era. Both President Bushes, using, again, the social issues, dog whistling towards racism. And then 10 years ago, they won an election by, calling ACA socialism. And as soon as he got into power, Mitch McConnell stated that he was going to use his power to ensure that Obama was going to be a one-term president, and it has been partisan ever since. And then Trump realized that in order to win elections, because they've lost the popular vote in all but one election in the 21st century, in order for them to win, they really need the white supremacist and the nationalist base. They cannot win without it. It's big enough, and they need that to win. So you've got this situation where you've got all these Republicans who are afraid to be primaried. They have made the political calculus or algebra, whatever you want to call it, that there is no political premium on crossing the aisle, on cooperating with the other side. Right. They know that they need these people to win, and that they know that if they don't have this crazy wing voting for them, they might even lose a primary. They're more afraid of losing a primary than they are of losing in the general, because of the way it's gerrymandered. So I think you've got a lot of Republicans who may be privately telling people, that, well, they're not happy, with Trump or what he did, but publicly, if they want to stay in office, this is what they have to do. And Liz Cheney is learning a lesson right now. She stood up and voted, was kind of the leader of the 10 Republicans who voted for impeachment. And now the Freedom Caucus wants her head. They want to remove her from the third position of the Republican House. What do you call it? Anyways, she's being almost primaried at this point. And so you've got the situation where you got Republicans that there's no political value to working with Democrats right now, except in maybe a handful of the districts.
My problem with that, I think you're right. I think that is the calculus, but I have a problem with that calculus in that it goes against what's happening demographically in this country. So it seems to me that the Republican Party deciding to go in that direction is of no benefit in the future. That's not going to make them more palatable to a national voting populace. Right. It seems to me that they're at a point where they need to decide to cut ties with the Trumpist wing of the party. Now, that will result in short-term harm, but it will give them time. The Republicans you and I would recognize, it would give that cohort time to reorganize and begin speaking to the middle of the country again. And it seems to me that's the only way they can become a bigger tent and attract more votes nationally to remain relevant. I think if they just go down the road with the Jim Jordans of the world, they're going down a dead end, don't you think?
I think so too, because first of all, eventually that brand of politics is going to die off, literally. Yeah. These are, a lot of them are older. There are some younger people in this one, but a lot of them are older. The most intense ones are, in their 50s and even 60s. I mean, notable, 3 of the people who died in the insurrection last week had heart attacks. Yeah. Right? You didn't see that happen in the Black Lives Matter or, Antifa demonstrations, because they're in their 20s. These guys are up there with their high blood pressure and, and getting themselves worked up. And 3 of them died because of that. I mean, that's probably a record, So, yeah. So they are, getting older, and represent, a brand of politics that is becoming less and less relevant. But there are enough of them right now, and the Congress is so gerrymandered that that you've got a lot of districts that really are just oriented towards this extreme. I don't see any end of it soon. And you saw it today in the debate. You saw a few people saying, well, Trump's words were inappropriate, but they don't rise to the level of having fomented the actual violence. And it is tricky. It's tricky law. And I'll talk about that in a little bit in terms of what's called the heckler's veto in terms of incitement. It's a tough thing to prove in a court of law, but you don't have to actually prove that, make all the elements of a crime in an impeachment. It's, you just have to say the president did it. He got up there and said these things. Yep. And said he was going to be marching with them, by the way. He didn't. He retreated back to the White House or to that tent or whatever, wherever, they were playing Gloria to celebrate whatever they thought was going to happen. And and then this happened, and so there's definitely a time frame there where if you can't draw the causality of it. What did he think was going to happen when he said you have to fight? You can't be weak. Don Jr. saying, you've got to fight. Rudy Giuliani saying we need a trial by combat. What do they think these words are going to do? Yeah. And of course, some of the Republicans today were saying, well, these hardcores who committed the worst violence, they were planning it for weeks, so they weren't incited. And it's like that was just made more gasoline there. If Trump had to have known about this, so right. Why wasn't he actively trying to calm them down during his actual speech? And I don't care right. that he said we're going to go there peaceful. The rest of the speech and the intensity of the whole rally was to get them whipped up. And I'm sorry, I believe that Trump actually intended, stupidly maybe, but intended that the proceedings would be completely disrupted, yep. that congressmen would be scared to death, maybe even some of them killed. They did put a noose up outside. Nobody knows whether that was a joke or for real, but people went in with the zip ties and hardcore weapons. At least 6 guns were seized. Several pipe bombs were found. Right. In the vicinity. This was a serious thing, and they were all in the crowd with them. Maybe they were planning to do it anyway. Maybe they would have done it no matter what Donald Trump had to say, but he didn't do anything to set it down. And it's not like it was a secret. Anybody, when it was on the internet, saw this happening, coming. I mean, it just so.
Well, there's video. I don't know if you saw this today, but there is video. Some of it's cell phone video, but there is quite a bit of video of people in that crowd as they're getting to the Capitol building and even inside the Capitol building, talking about the fact that he sent us there. He told us to come here, and they're watching his tweets for more orders. I mean, they are literally taking their marching orders from Donald Trump, and that's on tape. It's recorded. So, whether that was his intent, I believe it was, because his whole idea has been to overturn the election. So, and this was his last chance, right? So, yeah, I think that there's plenty of evidence that he did incite this violence. And if that's not impeachable, then nothing is. And so I don't think that members of Congress from either party should have seen that there was a choice here. I mean, this is the kind of thing that you need to stop. And, a democracy like ours, a republic like ours, can't continue with that kind of thing going on. That's the whole point, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and with Republicans today still saying that the election might have been stolen, they're still fanning those flames. That is at the core of why we have this. If I was convinced that an election had been stolen, a national election like that, I would be going crazy too. I don't think I'd be doing what they were doing, but I would have no faith in the system whatsoever. And if and if I was a low information kind of person who believed in what my leaders were saying, that is huge. And he hammered on it over and over again. Even today, Trump has not really conceded. He did not say that he lost the election. Even today, most of the Republicans would not say, yes, the election was won fairly. I mean, even the commentators on television were still saying, well, it would be nice if we could have a commission look into it. It's like you have over 60 court cases look into it. It was done. It's not, there's nothing there. And you need to be able to tell your followers that. You need to say, yes, it's over. And until you do it, they're going to continue, because those that feel like that they're entitled to be violent if there's tyranny, and certainly they must see that this is tyranny taking over, laws failing. They have no faith in it whatsoever. I mean, this is so. Great. So today, even today, in discussing this, the Republicans were continuing to pour gasoline on this. Any public figure who continues to suggest that the election was stolen is is basically an accessory, either before or after the fact, or both.
Well, you're making my point, too, about the future of the Republican Party and what they should do. Precisely what you're talking about there. There were Republicans in the various states, Republican secretaries of state, Republican attorneys, Republicans in Congress, telling this cohort of people that the election was not stolen, that the election is over, that Biden and Harris won. There were Republicans who were saying that. The Trumpists, though, were not listening to them. They were only listening to Donald Trump's Twitter feed, which was telling them just the opposite. So that I think is evidence that the Republican Party, the Republican wing of the Republican Party, cannot go forward with the Trump side of the Republican Party. Those are two completely different political organizations there that probably cannot coexist in one party. So I think that the Republicans, to me, there's no decision. They need to separate into completely two different organizations, including two different caucuses in Congress. Now, I know that would mean that the reasonable Republicans you and I know would have some problems in the short term. But in the long term, I think that's the only way they survive as a nationally relevant party.
They also have to un-gerrymander these states. I mean, they got to get rid of it. Have you ever seen Steve Jordan's?
Yeah.
It's like a snake going through different things. They need to, every state needs to come up with a way to avoid gerrymander. California has done it. We can't gerrymander this, because of our setup. That really needs to be it, because it creates a premium for just being extreme and not compromising at all. If you feel like you might lose the middle and lose an election, you're going to want to compromise more. And like in the old days, you'd actually have to govern. But but it's more than that, because I think right now, there are a lot of people who want to say pox on both houses. There were Democrats who were making inflammatory statements during the BLM marches. Maxine Waters shouldn't have said it, go ahead and hassle people in restaurants, but it's not the equivalent. This was not just violence random. This was an attempt to destroy democracy. This was a coup. This we need to understand there's a qualitative difference there. So it's, there's being extremely irresponsible and maybe having blood on your hands if you've encouraged violence that doesn't happen, but you've also got that, the republic, it was threatened last week. This was if they had gotten in and killed people and caused the thing not to happen, the counting of the Electoral College not to happen, that would have been huge. If it had not been finished in that hearing that began on that day, the Constitution would have been violated right then and there. So there's no equivalent here. I mean, there's equivalent, but as we just got the note about whataboutism. That was a lot of what the Republicans had to say today. Well, what about BLM? Well, what about all the things that happened before? They literally set buildings on fire. We're talking about a metaphor for what happened last week. And it's like you're missing the point. This was an attempt to overthrow democracy. Plain and simple.
Yeah, a lot of the folks on the floor of the Congress, the Republicans today, were pointing to the Black Lives Matter protest over the summer and talking about what went on there. And there was a lot of looting in several cities. There's no question about it. And that should not have happened. That hurts the cause anytime something like that happens. That is true, but that's opportunistic looting during a protest. That's very different than an armed insurrection attempting to take over the one part of the United States government while Congress people are in session, while the vice president is in the building. People are armed, they have zip ties, they have bombs, nooses, as you said. Those are not the same things at all. Was the looting over the summer good? No. Should it have been condemned? Yes. Is it too bad it happened? Yes, but that's not the same as trying to overturn the United States government in Washington. Two completely different things. And I have to believe that some of the folks on the floor of the U.S. House today during this impeachment proceeding know that, but they are so terrified of the base that they cannot bring themselves to speak clearly about it.
Yeah. I mean, I expected actually more legal arguments. There actually are some interesting legal defenses. There is what's referred to as the heckler's veto.
Yeah.
Because somebody gets up and says something and then some violence happens soon thereafter, that does not necessarily mean you're guilty of incitement. And especially if you can separate it with time and all of that. Famous case as the First Amendment law was evolving in the early 70s, there were intense anti-war demonstrations in Berkeley going on at the time. Activist named Dan Siegel, pretty well-known name, I think he was later counsel for Oakland, was charged with a crime. It was dismissed and then was being denied access to the bar membership. And that also got overturned because what he'd done was stood up in front of a crowd and said, someone ought to go burn down the ROTC building, right? Mm-hmm. Sure enough, later that night, some people burned down the ROTC building. So they were, they basically charged him, but it was dropped because, the prosecution would have had to have proved beyond a reasonable doubt that, first of all, the people that actually burned down the building were actually present at that rally and heard from him, were motivated by his words. No guarantee of that. Could have been coincidence. But more specifically, if you're speaking hyperbole, that doesn't mean you're necessarily responsible for every crazy thing that happens because people take your hyperbole literally. It's one thing if you say, you have a time, place, and manner. Okay, we're going to get together at midnight tonight. We're going to have, stuff to burn down, the equipment we need to burn down the ROTC, and then we're going to do it. That's different. You've actually stated, a time, a place, and how you're going to do it. But just to state it in general, you didn't. So what did Trump say? We got to fight. It's all kind of vague. Where I say that defense fails is he knew, he had the intelligence as to who was in the audience, what they had, what they were planning. Republicans today even admitted that. They said, oh, yeah, there were intelligence reports that were going to happen. Then why wasn't he taking active measures to prevent that? Why wasn't he actively trying to discourage it? I know that some of you people came here to take up arms, and you're all very brave, but that's not what I'm asking you for. I'm asking you to be, nothing like that. It was, everything was to inflame, enhance. Of course, he didn't say, I want you to go burn down or invade and kill people, and bring your zip ties. I mean, he didn't say that, but it was just as bad given all the circumstances. This would not have happened if he did not give that speech.
Exactly. And so let me ask you this, Counselor. Does the fact that audio and video does exist of the rioters at the Capitol, on the steps, and even inside the Capitol, saying that they are there because of what the president told them, does that establish cause and effect? And the fact that they continue to follow his tweets and to continue to follow his orders while they are in the process of carrying out this attempted coup, does that establish for a court of law cause and effect?
Certainly evidence. I mean, you got to look at all the factors. It would depend on what all the witnesses had to say, including the defendants in those cases, but it's certainly evidence of it. And look, I was on the internet debating people, and there was some guy, or it could have been a man or woman, I don't know. I was debating because I know it wasn't the real name, who was telling me Donald Trump will be president after January 20th. It was absolutely certain of it, and I'm like saying, there's no way. Once the electors had been chosen, it's inevitable. What happens on the 6th is ceremonial, and this person just kept saying, Donald Trump doesn't lose, and by the way, you might want to keep your pansy liberal ass out of the streets if you don't want to get hurt. Stay out of the way. I mean, so I'm thinking he's talking about some brilliant strategy that Trump was going to do, some brilliant parliamentary strategy to somehow overdo this. In retrospect, they were talking on all of the dark parts of the web, 2chan, 4chan, 8chan, and a bunch of these places that can't be shut down necessarily, like Parler has been shut down. That they were planning this. They were saying the Donald Trump has issued a call to arms. We're going to show up there with our guns. A lot of people brought them, the right to carry, right. And so if I had a sense that could happen, I'm sure the FBI must have been able to do it. But I've got to say, I'm really disappointed also with the fact that until this morning, we went 5 days. Jared Huffman pointed this out Sunday night. No briefings. No public briefings by any of the security entities, either the DC police, the FBI, DOJ, any of it. Just dead radio silence the whole time.
Right.
And I mean, they should have been having briefings every day, giving reports. And they're saying, oh, well, they can't answer all the questions because it would compromise it. Well, that's what you do. You go up there and you say, I can't comment on that because it would compromise the investigation. They do that all the time. Police do that all the time.
Yeah.
But they should at least be there answering questions. It's almost like they didn't want to be there, didn't want to even give the impression that they're going to be coming down on the redneck ninjas. I mean, I'm sorry that I think that there is a cultural issue there. We saw it with some of the officers doing selfies and letting people in.
Yeah.
They will go after BLM people hard, but they do not want to go after these people. It's their cousins. It's their people.
Yeah.
And so so this was a powder keg from the beginning. It will happen again. If there aren't steps taken. All of the cops that did selfies should be fired summarily. The Secret Service guy who was tweeting in favor of Trump should be fired summarily. I mean, this is really dangerous. Lives were in danger. People, there were Congress people and aides that were in that building terrified for their lives. And we saw some acts of bravery. That one officer who led the crowd away from the Senate chambers.
Right.
Good for him risking his life. Probably saved some senators' lives for all we know.
Probably.
At first I thought maybe the shooting of that woman was unjustified. I then got to see a video from a different angle, and that gun was pointing out at them with warnings coming several times. Do not come through the glass. Do not pass that level. And she just kept coming. And she's an intense woman. I've seen her videos that she posted beforehand, and she just kept coming, and it cost her life.
Yeah.
And that probably saved the lives of the Congress people that were in that hall.
Yeah.
So,
well, a couple of interesting things happened yesterday and today as well, kind of following on what you're talking about there. For the first time, I believe I'm right about this, for the first time, if not the first, one of the few times in recent memory, the polling shows that Republicans are now backing off of their support for Donald Trump. And recall that for the last since 2015, when he announced, he's had 85, 90, 92, 93% approval within the Republican Party. That's taken a huge hit recently. And the other thing that happened that may be more significant is that a lot of corporate funders of the Republican Party have begun backing off from supporting, or saying that they will no longer support Republican politicians. And that's the lifeline. I mean, that kind of funding is what they depend on. So once again, it just makes me wonder how the Republican Party can stay relevant nationally if they don't cut ties with that part of the party as it exists right now. I don't see how it can. I think they have some very difficult decisions to make in the very near future.
I agree. And it just seems like most of them, even that day, just came right back with the crazy agenda. I mean, as if nothing had happened. One guy got outraged and tried to pick a fight with somebody who called him a liar. I mean, it was just they are so enveloped. Even if they were afraid for their lives, apparently their fear of being primaried is more powerful than their fear for their lives. I mean, and of course, if they'd gotten to the people, the first ones who would have been grabbed would have been anybody of color, and anybody they recognized as a Democrat, but could have gotten to them too. I mean, this was a coup attempt, and they insist on calling it a riot. It wasn't a riot. This was an actual coup attempt, and it needs to be framed that way. And anybody who continues to support it and continues to support the theory that the election was stolen, when you've had 60 court cases, when you've got Republican Secretary of States that received that threatening phone call from Trump, consistent again with all of it and inflaming. I don't know. There has to be a change. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how you can do it. I don't know how you can undo gerrymandering. I know that President Obama that's what he wants to work on, is undoing the gerrymandering. So far, and unfortunately, almost the entire South is gerrymandered to do that. We saw it in Alabama really badly, where black population is something like 25% of the population, but they only have one congressional representative out of 7.
Texas is the same way.
Yeah, I think about the only state that's been gerrymandered to benefit Democrats is Maryland. Mm-hmm. Other than that, there really isn't one, and that's why, despite the fact that the Democrats routinely get 55 to 60% of the vote across the country, they come up short in houses and definitely in the Senate. That's completely unfair. Anachronistic setup is probably even worse than the Electoral College in some ways. And so,
well, it was also interesting to me today, and maybe you heard this, you probably did, some of the ways that some of the Republicans were trying to say that we should just move on. A couple of them were highlighting the fact that there's been a good economy over the last 4 years, and there have been tax cuts over the last 4 years. Well, first of all, that good economy got devastated by a pandemic that was largely ignored by the administration, at first just called a hoax, and then everybody was told it's just going to disappear. So that devastated the economy. How many millions of people have been on unemployment ever since? And the tax cuts went to, just the wealthy, or at least the top few percent. And that never trickles down to the rest. And that doesn't justify an armed attempt at a takeover of the legislative branch of the country. So, it just seems to me that the arguments they're trying to make are plainly rebuttable. And I think that once the Biden-Harris administration gets in, there's going to be a flurry, I think, of legislation and also executive orders that try to address some of this, because clearly we cannot go forward just relying on tradition and custom, because a leader like Donald Trump, we now know, is possible. Somebody who will just disregard all custom and tradition as far as our politics goes.
Yeah, and I also find some of the Republicans annoying who are like saying, wow, I never knew he could be like this. It's really nothing inconsistent with what he's doing. No. It is absolutely the finale of his presidency that anybody could have, could have predicted. It's like a bad movie written. I mean, it wasn't like he was ever going to concede. He absolutely will not ever concede. That's not something he does, and it wasn't even a close election. It was, I mean, it wasn't close in terms of the Electoral College. It was basically his same, what he called a landslide in terms of the Electoral College, and he lost by 7 million votes.
Yeah, it was closer in 2016 against Clinton. That was what, 3 million?
Yeah.
And this was 7. So yeah.
And yet they're still maintaining this thing of, well, maybe it was stolen. We need to look into it, have a commission. And it's just anybody saying that is just either so far out of touch or they are just absolutely politically soulless. I mean, that there should just be no tolerance for it. And I notice, trying to think of the name of the woman, Woodruff does PBS. I was watching
Judy Woodruff.
Judy Woodruff. Thank you. She's usually polite, and she had oh God, I'm trying to think of the name of that Florida congressman who was there until a few years ago, and he's out of power. You'd think he'd be able to say this, and he's like saying, "Oh yes, what the president did was wrong." But it would be nice if, just for the sake of the millions of people who have questions, if there was a commission. And she just went into him and said, "You're still saying that after this. This is exactly, what is continuing to inflame and divide the country. And you have no evidence." Well, maybe the commission would find it. And it's like, yeah, well, I mean, it's just, I wish I could remember the guy's name. His former, anyways, he was in the House for years. Anyway, I guess, I mean, we've basically said it. I mean, it's just, there doesn't seem to be any improvement. There are cracks. A few people, 10 people, maybe some people in the Senate will vote for it, but I don't think they're going to be able to get 60 people in the Senate to convict. Not like this. Although rumors that Mitch McConnell might consider it. But like I said, he brought us Trumpism before Trumpism was even here. I mean, that would just be the beginning of him having to try to redeem himself, because I consider him in some ways to be worse for the country than Trump. He made Trump possible.
Absolutely. His cynicism for supporting Trump just to get judges. And a lot of those judges unqualified, according to the American Bar Association. So, yeah, he has a lot of blame to shoulder, in my view, for sure. As far as whether he might be convicted in the Senate, which could happen even after he's out of office, by the way, and there could also be a vote along with it to bar him from holding federal office in the future. But there was a report late today that there might be only 9 or 10 Republican senators who are still going to go along with this. So it's possible they could get to 2/3 in the Senate to convict him, and then also to pass a resolution barring him from holding federal office in the future. Now, maybe
isn't that redundant? I thought if he was impeached, he can't.
Apparently, there has to be what would it be? A codicil attached to it that explains and stipulates the intent of the conviction. Does also carry barring him from holding federal office. Now, it can't do anything about some state office somewhere, but that's not aggrandizing enough for Donald Trump anyway. So, yeah, apparently that has to be attached to it. Almost, somebody was explaining it today, a little bit like a signing statement that a president might attach to a bill that he's signing. So this would be an attachment to it that would indicate that the intent is to bar him from holding federal office. So
yeah, well, and he would also be denied his pension, as well as Secret Service detail that normally he'd be entitled to for the rest of his life. Yeah, I mean, there's not much else to talk about in politics right now. This is kind of overwhelming it. I know that Biden is quietly preparing. Apparently, he's got a plan for speeding up the distribution of the vaccine, more federal coordination, and helping with that, putting resources into the states. We'll see if it works. And part of the concern, even he kind of expressed a little bit, is, if the Senate has to do a trial on this, how much is he going to get done? And so they're talking about putting the trial off until after the 100 days to give him a chance to fix the country first. But would there be an appetite for it after that? Especially if things are getting better.
That's why I think they should just go ahead and do it now while it's on everybody's agenda. But I don't think that that's going to happen. But I wonder if Joe Biden is fond of using the cliche about walking and chewing gum at the same time. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if they could actually do that, because I think the first impeachment of Donald Trump was only a couple of days by the time it got to the Senate. So I'm wondering if they could just set aside a couple of days at some point to get this done, however it turns out. I would think that they could be at work for a couple of days in Washington to do that on maybe a couple of days when they would otherwise be fundraising for themselves. I have to believe they can do that. I hope they do. I hope they don't just let this wither on the vine and people forget about it.
Yeah. I mean, it is real important that we establish a precedent for coming down on
exactly.
This. Otherwise, it will happen again.
There have to be political consequences, and there have to be legal consequences, in my view. There has to be some consequence for what went on, both politically and legally. For the people who did go in and destroy the property, for if there are people in Congress who aided and abetted that attempted coup, they should be held responsible both politically and legally. So you can't allow folks to get away with this at all, or our system that relies on people to do the right thing will collapse.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely have to be. I was a little bit worried because everybody being caught, who, and a lot of them were stupid enough to get caught by getting themselves into interviews or putting, themselves all over social media, they've been hauled back or being held in prison. And they're saying, well, trespass into a restricted building and disorderly conduct. But I have a feeling they're starting with that. I have a feeling they're going to start with that. First of all, there's a big range of culpability and criminality involved here. You've got the people that went in to catch people, possibly even kill people, and then you've got the idiots that just kind of went in with the crowd. They caught the guy with the bullhorns and and the fur thing, and he wants to he's demanding organic food, and he thinks that witches are the big problem in the world. Okay, just nail him, give him a 6-month year sentence for having been there, but they've got to get out of these people information about the other people who were in there so that they can track down the guy who hit the officer in the head with the fire extinguisher and the people with the zip tags and who went in there with like military like uniforms. They need to be nailed, because those are the serious hardcore people. They may have been incompetent and not known what they were doing, but if somebody ever really coordinated people like that, I mean, this was, if they could ever get in the building like that again and knew where to go and knew how to find the people that they were targeting, that's a very dangerous situation. And so there need to be some long sentences in this. And I'm not a Law and Order kind of person. I don't really say that, but in this type of scenario, there's got to be a precedent that no, you don't do this, or if you do, there's going to be serious consequences.
Yeah, I mean, what they were hoping for was a fundamental change in the way we do our business at the federal level. There is without a doubt an authoritarian strain in the Republican Party right now, and that's not sustainable. In the kind of system that we have. What a lot of the folks who were at the Capitol last week were hoping for was to install Donald Trump again with his authoritarian tendencies in order to stop this society from changing and moving forward. There's a cohort within the Republican Party that sees authoritarianism as a way to stop the kind of change that they don't like. And I think that's what this is all about. When in fact, any large society of human beings will inevitably change over time, will evolve in different directions in given enough time. And you can't stop that. You have to work with it. And that's the whole idea behind our system. But there's a cohort in the Republican Party that wants to stop everything the way it is, preserve the status quo with Donald Trump as the leader, and that's the problem for the Republican Party going forward, because they are going against the stream right now, against the current.
We got a problem too. The FBI is reporting that there are organizations that are supposedly planning, this type of thing in all 50 capitals.
Yep.
We'll see if that really manifests itself this weekend, apparently. But we still got a week that this guy is in power.
I know.
And this is like the longest days I've seen. Everybody's saying, look, Biden won this presidency, and normally, that it's all boring, and people are like, oh, he just got to be president today, on the 20th. People are wondering what he's going to do and how he's going to address this. I mean, I don't know that a president is walking into a tougher situation other than Franklin Delano Roosevelt or Obama 12 years ago. I mean, it's just an absolute, we'll see what he does. We'll see what he can do about this. But you've still got Republicans that are just, no matter what happens, they are not going to change their approach. Nor their rhetoric. It is just it's no, with maybe, except for maybe a handful of them, like Loeffler in Georgia. She said, "Oh, forget it. I'm not going to push this." So she withdrew her objection, and then she didn't have any reason to do it anymore. I mean, she's probably never going to run for office again. I mean, if somebody has a grievance against Donald Trump, she's got one, right? She and Purdue, because Trump's phone call probably cost them those 2 Senate seats.
Yes. Well, that's one of the things that some of the reporters in Washington are citing with regard to McConnell. The reason McConnell is now saying that he's open to conviction in the Senate is because his view is just what you were saying there, that Trump is the reason they lost both of those seats in Georgia, which means they lost the Senate, which means he's no longer going to be the Senate Majority Leader. And, as soon as both of those senators in Georgia are sworn in anyway. So, yeah, you're probably right. I agree. And how do they navigate after that? What do they do?
Yeah, and if he does vote to convict, does he get primaried in Kentucky? I mean, that'd be kind of funny to watch.
I don't think so. I think that the reason this has lasted as long as it has, you can peg the beginning of this. Some people say it's Trump. Some people say it was birtherism. Some people say it was the Tea Party. Others go back to Newt Gingrich or Reagan or wherever you want to start. I think this is the predictable end to this era. And so I think that what we're going to see going forward as political scientists look back at this, with 2020 hindsight, some years in the future, they're going to draw a line right here. And they're going to say that this particular, whatever it is, 20, 30, 40 years in the Republican Party was a particular point in time, and that after January of 2021, a new epoch, a new era in Republican politics began. We don't know what that's going to be, but I have a feeling this is going to be one of those benchmarks or one of those lines of demarcation in political history. I don't know if you agree with that, but that I can't see it any other way. I have to believe this is going to be a line.
Well, I guess, what you're saying is we're at the crossroads. So speaking of crossroads, we have reached that part of the show in which we give our predictions. I'm not doing so well in predictions so far this year, but we'll talk about that. But Chuck, what are your predictions?
Well, I agree. It's difficult to predict. It's difficult to predict tomorrow at this point, but My prediction has to do with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris right now. My prediction is that they're looking at this situation, and they, I think, are, if I were them, and I'm not, but I think that they are going to be working very closely with the Democratic National Committee and also with state Democratic parties now, I mean, starting now, to try to get them well funded, to make sure that they have voter registration protocols and staffing. I even think that the Biden-Harris team might take some of the folks who worked with them during the campaign and move them into Democratic politics in various places, some of them at DNC in Washington, but some of them spread out across the country, because I think that they will see this as an opportunity. Because as numbers come down within the Republican Party in support of this wing of the Republican Party, I think that Biden and Harris are going to see this as an opportunity and maybe a necessity to prevent this from happening again. And I think they're going to try to raise money, a lot of money, for Democrats all over the country, not just at the federal level, at the state and local levels too. And so I think you're going to see a rollout of something like that at some point in the near future.
All right. I'm probably going to blow this one too, but I am going to predict that we do not see a Senate trial right away. I think we're going to see the Senate impeachment trial happen possibly as late as after 100 days, as Clymer has been suggested. And one of the reasons being is, they didn't follow all the procedures. It didn't come out of the Judicial or Intelligence Committee this time around. They went straight to it. They could do that, but it's against the rules that they have right now. But the Senate is probably going to use the fact that Biden wants to get straight to work, fixing the economy and fixing the pandemic situation as an excuse to say, we're going to put this off till afterwards. This way they can actually really investigate the thing fully and actually conduct a real trial, because really the Republicans had it reversed with the way this last impeachment was done. It's really supposed to be the House that basically just makes an indictment like a grand jury, right. And it's the Senate where the actual evidence is supposed to be entered. They've been doing it backwards the whole time, and it may be that we get a real trial with real evidence that's been built up, including intelligence around, what we've been talking about, what's been floated on the internet, and Trump's awareness of it, and possibly also members of the House and maybe even Hawley being somewhat complicit. I think they're going to want to take their time. They want to get this thing done now before Trump was out of office, and then I think they're going to take their time and do a trial later, and maybe under much less inflamed circumstances, and maybe some more Republicans will be empowered to go along with the conviction.
Well, you may be right, and that may be the only way to get a lot of evidence collected, right? If they're wanting to make sure that this is an absolutely open and shut case that is well researched, well investigated, and that there was a trial that cannot be questioned in the Senate, then that would be the way to do it. I just don't know from a political calculation whether it would be a really good idea to wait that long and to revisit all of this at that point. I don't know if the public would have the appetite for it, but we'll see. I mean, they'll have to decide. They'll have to make a decision.
There'll be a lot of other trials going on. They may have an appetite for it the more we learn.
Oh, that could be. You're right.
Hey, anyways, we are at the end of the show. I just want to remind everybody you are watching Channel 12 Access Humboldt, or you're listening to us on KCZH 96.7, or you can watch us on YouTube. Look up Access Humboldt Redwood Wonk, or you can go straight to the Access Humboldt site. 7 o'clock on Tuesdays and Thursdays, or 7 on the radio, 7:30 on Wednesday, and 8:30 on Saturday on Channel 12. I think I finally got that down. Next week, well, we'll be talking about the inauguration and what happens there. We'll see if hopefully it's not that eventful and we can actually talk politics rather than the craziness that happened that day. But we'll see. Till then.